All right, guys. Thanks for being a part of this. I appreciate everybody's time. I just kind of want to begin real quickly by obviously sending out our program's thoughts with all those that have been affected by COVID-19, and it's obviously impacted so many in so many ways, and I think it's impacted those of us that obviously work in athletics. I can think of, Paul Logan, the AD at North Central High School in Indianapolis, which has been corresponding a little bit with his son. And so our program's thoughts go out to him and his family. Great news on Jody Demling and his recovery. It's great news. I followed that closely here from a distance through social media. So I know so many of you guys know and are friends and care about Jody. So great news on that front for sure. And then, obviously it's impacted so many around the world economically, and we're certainly trying to do our part here to mitigate some of those really challenging times that we have here. And I know, some of your colleagues are going through furloughs. So we think about all of you guys, appreciate you guys coming out and being a part of this. And we think of those that maybe we're not able to be a part of today. So all right, then. I think that means it's time to move on to the next topic here. So, hey, I just want to, before I open up for questions, just kind of, we did not have much of a end of the year wrap up given all the circumstances, press conference to wrap up the season with how sudden everything was. But just some final thoughts after we've had some distance and a few weeks to kind of take a step back and take a look at things on where we're at. And, obviously felt very, very good about where we were, how we were playing and how we were finishing. And to win 9 of our last 12 in the deepest league in the country says something about how we were playing. We obviously had some struggles in January, but we were able to respond to that well. Had a great start to the season, a difficult January, and then to respond like we did. And when you look back at the numbers for us, we had our highest AP ranking, I believe, in our 3-year. We had the best collection of offensive and defensive efficiency, top 20. I think we were one of 6 teams to finish top 20 in offense and defensive efficiency in the country. And that was the best in our 3 years here. So we saw significant real improvement and growth from our second year to our third year in those numbers. And those numbers certainly don't guarantee you anything, but I think when you're one of 6 teams to be top 20 in those 2 numbers, it certainly says you have a real chance to advance. We all know the unpredictability of the NCAA tournament, and I'm not here to make any crazy claims, but I certainly did feel confident about our ability to perform well and to give ourselves a chance to really advance in the NCAA tournament. And given the numbers, I think that they certainly back that up. Moving forward, obviously we have a number of guys that have played significant minutes for us in Big Ten play. We have 7 guys returning. 6 of those have played pretty significant Big Ten minutes for us. And we're going to really, really count on those guys to take the next step in their overall development as players. We're really excited about our 2 freshmen, which we've talked about, Eugene Brown and Zed Key, and excited about some of our additions. Only one of which I can speak about, but I think overall we're very optimistic about guys that in our program right now that really have the chance to take the next step, both young and old. whether that's, EJ taking the next step that we've all talked about, or our guards continuing to grow, or Kyle, whatever the case may be. I think we're really excited about that. Obviously, Caleb has put his name in, and I believe he's really committed to this process as we expected that he would be. And we fully support that. Caleb had a tremendous year for us, as did his brother. Those two guys will be significant losses for us. There's no question. Both Wessons will be significant losses for us. But we really fully support Caleb in this. CJ Walker also is wanting to go through the process of kind of gathering information, but I don't want anybody to overreact. He fully expects and plans to come back and lead our team. But I think that's a right that every player has, and we support him in that, to just kind of gather information. I think CJ is doing a little bit of what Caleb did last year in terms of gathering information. But for Caleb, he and his family are continue to move forward with that process, as well as with Andre, and we're excited to kind of see where that takes him. I believe that's really all I had in terms of opening statement. Sorry for the length of it. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in here.
Okay, thanks, Coach. First, we'll go with Mike DeCourcy, Sporting News.
Yes, Chris, I'm not asking you to speak to any specific circumstance, but I'm trying to get a feel for what is leading to the escalation of player transfers who are playing. That's the question about, we see guys move because they aren't playing very much or something like that. But when you have guys who are starting and playing significant amounts early in their career, why are we seeing more of those players transfer than in the past?
Mike, I would probably say I just think it's, it's a variety of different reasons. I think generally players in those situations, they just, they want a situation where maybe they are playing a different position, or maybe they want more shot attempts, or they want more of something. And I think that is where a lot of this, I don't think in any cases, or very few cases, is there anything else kind of beyond that. I think it really boils pretty simply down to that. And you could probably go back, Mike, and look at studies where that has worked out well for those that made that decision. And then you could certainly find a significant number where it did not work out as well, or in fact worked out less in their favor. But that's certainly their right. And I know all of us as coaches, we understand that now and support them. And the reality is too, Mike, and you know this because you talk to coaches, it is certainly true that in a number of those situations, the coaches are of the opinion, and you know what, it probably is best for both. And I'm not talking specifically on any specific situation, but throughout my number of years, that's usually the case where if you have that conversation, or you may just look at it and say it's probably best. And in talking to coaches, in these last couple of weeks, all over the country, some that have had those happen, some haven't. That's generally been the opinion that they've felt like it's time maybe to move on. And I think we all wish guys well in their next place.
Anything else, Mike?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, I will go to Mitch Stacy, Associated Press.
Hey, Chris.
Hey,
just wondering, good. You would be in the off season now, and I'm just wondering what your typical day is like there, and how the quarantining is keeping you from doing the things that you would be doing normally at this time of year.
Yeah, it's I think most of us as coaches are used to a routine. I've tried to develop some type of a routine. And a typical day for me will look like a workout in the morning, some type of workout. I put a gym, a really very much makeshift, if you can remember any of the Rocky movies, think of that, gym in my garage. And it's usually going to involve either a run or a workout in the morning. I'll usually touch base with staff in the morning on a conference call for half an hour, 45 minutes, to kind of set the agenda for the day. And then the next few hours through the middle part of the day could be a number of calls to after the season, it was a number of calls to kind of set up our academic support for our guys in a remote way, to talk to our players, parents, recruits, parents, incoming players, parents, and then obviously all of the recruiting calls that usually take place from middle of the afternoon on into the evening. At times I've tried to dive into some film study, but, there have certainly been a number of days where I've been on the phone, between 8 to 10 hours a day. So I've not been able to get on calls into some film work as much as I would like to, but that's certainly something we're going to do moving forward. And then obviously I've had a chance to spend a lot more time having meals as a family together, and it's been really good because it's allowed me to really evaluate my wife's cooking, which she's really appreciated. It's all of that's been good, and the time with them has been great, and that's what it looks like.
Other than your wife's cooking, what's something that you've learned over the last month while this has been going on?
I've learned she's a better cook than she gives herself credit for, and I have learned that I love my family, and I love going to work, if that makes sense. I really do appreciate, I just enjoy, working. I enjoy my job, as basic as that does sound. I think you're reminded when something's kind of taken away from you, at least the routine, I think you're reminded I really do enjoy coaching. I love our team, love our guys. I think you're reminded of the dignity and the value of work.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Okay. All right, thanks, Rich. I'll go to Bill Landis, The Athletic.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Bill.
When you look at the way you've constructed this roster for next year, it looks like you'll probably have 4 transfers who will be pretty major parts of your rotation. I know you can't talk about them all specifically, but just a general idea of building your roster that way. Like, is that an ideal situation in your mind? Do you do any reevaluation of how you guys recruit high school prospects, or do you just look at it as we can field a competitive team in this league by partly building it through transfers?
I don't know that those numbers necessarily, Bill, would be outside of my ideal. I wouldn't necessarily look at that and say that's ideal or not ideal. I think all of them we brought on for various reasons. I do think, as all of you that are on the call understand, right? If you just look at pure numbers let's take a look at, say, the final 4 teams from 2007, 8, 9, and 10. of those Final Four teams, there was one 4-year transfer that started, and that was Ron Lewis. That was an Ohio State player, Ron Lewis. So if you fast forward that to the previous 4 years, 13 4-year transfers started on Final Four teams. So I think the reality is as you know, Bill, this has been changing for a number of years. So I don't really look at it like this way is exactly how it has to be or that way is exactly how it has to be. I think we're always evaluating what we can do and what we can do better and how we can improve. And you're also particularly in April, May, June, the idea of roster management, it is a critical part of your job now. So I think there always is some, it's challenging. There's no question about it. There's flexibility to it. I don't see it changing anytime soon, but I will say to you that I anticipate that, the bulk of our roster, and certainly the bulk of our rotation, will be with your so to speak, your typical 4-year player. Maybe not 4-year player, but your typical high school recruit, probably be a better thing. That I think that's what the bulk of our roster will always look like. But I think there'll be some years where you might have more incoming transfers than others.
So this might be asking a similar question kind of a different way. I don't intend it that way, but the fact that you guys have signed 4 high school players the last 2 years, and half of them have left for varying reasons. I know they're not all the same. Is 4 out of 8 leaving over 2 years too many? And does it make you guys, or I guess, do you feel like you've done a good enough job evaluating high school prospects that you brought into your program, given that number?
Well, I think if you look at the numbers, I would say that as you may or may not know, we're basically at the Big Ten average, and we're actually below the overall Power 6, Power 7 average in our 3 years. So I think the reality is I think there's always things we can look at and do better and evaluate. And certainly when we take a look at it, are there some things we could have looked at and said, I'm not sure this is best. Sure. But at the same time, I don't think you're ever going to be without some transition every year, particularly as we move forward. So you almost have to account for that. I also think that there is very certainly a normal part of taking over a job where you add rather large classes is somewhat of shuffling in your roster. That's just the reality. And the opening part is, I do, given, and obviously it's, we've had a run here of adding a couple players that unfortunately I can't speak about outside of Seth, but I feel as good about this roster leading into the off season as I felt in any off season, and I just feel really good about the young guys, our older guys, their leadership, and there's no question we got to figure out what we're going to do with losing some size in Caleb and Andre's effectiveness. There's no question, but I feel as good as I felt as a head coach heading into the off season about just the collection of guys, young and old, that we've added and that we have in our roster.
Okay. Thanks, Coach. We'll go to Bill Rabinowitz with the Columbus Dispatch.
Yeah, hi, Chris. I was going to fill in for Adam.
Hey, Bill. Yeah.
Hi. You said earlier in response to Mike DeCourcy's question that usually when it comes to transfers, it's a kind of a mutual decision. Was that the case with the guys who are leaving the program? Is it like, okay, maybe it is best for you to go for whatever reason? And do you feel okay about that? Were there any of those guys that you wish had come back?
Well, listen, I'd rather not get specific on cases because I would just tell you that DJ and Luther, those two young men, because I think it's everybody understands. I think Alonzo's headed towards professionalization, but in terms of DJ and Luther, I don't really want to get into specifics, but I wish them well. I think what you look for, Bill, as much as anything, is when we're talking about roster management, is how do the pieces fit, and how do you allow your what is best moving forward, and sometimes it's best moving forward for returning guys or younger guys to grow into increased roles. And in order for them to grow into increased roles, sometimes there is some movement that needs to take place. And I don't think we'll ever have as much movement as some programs have, whether it's these guys going to the draft or this or that. We won't ever have that. I think it'll be consistently more stable than that. But the reality is you are always, it's a constant evaluation of what fits best. And if a young man says, hey, this is what I want, and you don't feel like it can be in good faith, you don't feel like it's best for him or for the program, then I think naturally those honest conversations are going to happen. And it's it's not a reflection on the young man or it's the reality. You can't start 10 guys. You can't play, 4 point guards at one time. You can't play 10 guys 40 minutes. It's the reality. And so that's all I meant by that. But I wouldn't specifically, those are terrific young men and I think going to do well wherever they go.
Okay. And I think you said you can talk about Steph Towns. What will he bring if you can, in fact, talk about him?
I can, Dan, right? That's been cleared?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, Seth is obviously really mature young man, having graduated from Harvard. That's a tremendous honor, obviously a tremendous accomplishment. And he brings a real maturity and been coached very well. I think Tommy and his staff do a great job at Harvard. And he's got what we felt like with him, Bill, was his shooting provides a real specific opportunity and need for us and his maturity. Now, we all know that he has to get to a place of health and full health. But provided that happens, we're really excited about his addition for the next couple years.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Bill. Now we'll move on to Tim with WBNS Radio.
Hey, Chris. Hope you're doing well, man. I was wondering, through this time, how none of it is really about coaching ball. And the last time we interviewed you, you talked a lot about roster management, how it's just kind of consuming the sport right now. I'm just wondering, with really it being limited to maybe getting out in your driveway, or if you're lucky enough to have access to a gym of solitude or anything like that, what do you expect out of your basketball players? What would you even tell the younger basketball players that are still trying to develop what they should be working on with their games right now?
Well, we've given them workouts, Tim. Quadrian Banks has sent that to them, and it's a lot of what I think people refer to it as it's a homework. For example, I believe E.J. Liddell is going to he goes to his high school track and runs with his mom runs with him. And in his workouts, but it does, right. It's not the same as being here and being monitored and evaluated by, monitored and evaluated here, by Coach Q. So that's really what all the guys are doing, is they're doing some of those, and they're harder than I think they anticipated them being, based on our meeting yesterday, our team meeting, and some of the complaints we were getting, which you love as a coach. They're a lot harder than people imagine. That's about the extent of what they can do right now, because I think one or two of them might have found like a gym in somebody's house. But that's really the exception.
Hey, real quick, I was wondering if you've had any time in the evenings, with the rest of sort of the sports world, watching all these classic games. I know they've been on all over the place. I'm wondering if there's been anything that you've caught that you've been able to reminisce about, whether it's with one of your own teams or a different team that you've followed through the years.
I've watched a few of our games. I believe I watched a couple of our games there towards the end of the year. I believe I watched our Michigan home game and a couple of ones. And I also, my wife and daughter and I, a couple weeks ago on a Sunday, went to YouTube and we wanted to watch the 2011, I believe 2011, our Final Four game. Or was it 12? Excuse me. With Kansas. So that was I had not remembered seeing that. I had the 7 game was more seared into my mind, but the other one was not. So I enjoyed going back and watching that, and I think I may go watch the one prior to 2007 here next.
Thanks, Coach.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
Sure.
Now we'll go to Matt McCoy at WTVN Radio.
Hey, Chris. You should watch the regional final against Syracuse. You should watch the regional final against Syracuse. It's a much better ending for them.
Yeah, I will.
In 2012.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, I know you just mentioned that you talked with the team yesterday. I mean, I saw the picture on social media. You guys, how is when you have guys leave the program and got recruited with each other, they become friends and everything? I'm just wondering how your guys have reacted, and do you feel good about, hey, this happened and we're ready to move forward? How have the guys reacted to that?
Yeah, great. I think they're really, really, Matt, I really think they're excited about, next year, and excited about their role. And, you got to remember, a couple of those young men Luther was the only one that was with us towards the end of the year, really for the last 12 to 15 games. So, they support those guys, and yet just really excited about I think a group we have moving forward. And they also, they obviously have some built-in friendships with the guys returning, are really excited about that. I think they're anxious to get to know our 2 freshmen. They'd love to be able to do that in June. Who knows if that's going to happen, but no, it's been very, it's just been a very positive vibe and feel. And I know they wish those guys well, and they stay in contact with them.
Specifically also regarding your team next year, you're talking about expanded roles. I want to ask you about Dwayne, because he, there were a lot of ups and downs this year, but if you look statistically, he obviously took a step forward. Yep. He's going to be now an upperclassman now going into next year. For lack of a better way to ask it, how good do you think he can become, and how much are you, now that he's going to be a junior, I know there's stuff you want to get out of his game, but how much are you going to rely on a kid like that in terms of expanded roles and things like that?
Oh, it'll be significant, Matt. It'll be significant. I think, again, when you look back at, I'll name a number of guys, EJ, CJ, Dwayne, Kyle, I think Justin and Musa, all those guys, Ibrahima needs to take a step forward. But as I said a couple weeks ago, that part of, again, the normal kind of the normal things that happen with your roster is guys emerge. And I think what we saw this past season was Dwayne emerge in a lot of ways, and particularly offensively, and had some critical moments in critical games, and played really, really well for us, and obviously played well when we also played him with the ball in his hands more, Matt. I think he's got a tremendous amount of upside. You got to remember, he's young. He's actually young for his class. So he's still growing to his, who he is as a player. And, there's a lot of room for growth there with him. There really is. But we've got to pull it out of him. That's our job as coaches. And he played a very big role for us late, and I know that will continue, and it'll actually increase, as will the case for EJ and those other guys we mentioned.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, thanks, Matt. We'll go to Joe Dempsey with BSB.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for doing this.
Sure, Joe.
Yeah. You mentioned how the Big Ten is the deepest league in the country, and I was just wondering, with that, what are some of the benefits of bringing in transfers who have multiple years of experience in playing and practicing at the college level?
Well, I think that the exciting thing for us here is we have, I believe, a good blend of returning guys that have been a part of our system, as well as experienced guys, experienced guys in the program, as well as experienced guys from a couple other programs. And I think that helps you. Now we've got to blend those guys together. We got to blend that group together. And we're going to be much different. Again, we lost, numbers-wise, percentage-wise, our two best perimeter shooters in both Wessons, and they were certainly two of our better defenders, and they provided great length for us. So we are going to look differently and be a little bit different. But I think what you hope as a coach is that the guys in your returning program develop and take that next step. And that's what we saw in guys last year. We saw Caleb take another step. Andre take another step. Dwayne took another step. CJ Walker grew as the year went on. And EJ took a tremendous step in season. Kyle Young was beginning to take another step. I think Justin would have if he'd have been healthy. So that has to happen moving forward. And then the addition of those guys with experience will help us.
And in reference to Caleb's improvement, you always talked about how much better he was as a defender in the paint and defending the pick and roll. I was just wondering what your plan is in replacing him in the interior of the defense.
Say the last part again. I'm sorry.
What the plan is moving forward without like the typical 5-man in the interior of the defense.
Yeah. So I think in general, we're going to have to look at how we do things and probably play. We're going to be playing differently offensively and defensively. There's no question. Just because while Caleb wasn't, you can be a really good rim protector and not necessarily be a prolific shot blocker. And I think that's what Caleb was, and so was his brother. He was a tremendous. He just protected the rim with his wall ups and his hibberts. So we're going to have to play a little bit differently for sure. We're going to have to play how we defend the post probably a little bit differently, as well as some of the things we do in our ball screen coverages. And listen, I get it. It's a major question mark for us moving forward, how we're going to answer that. He did a lot for us offensively and defensively. So that'll be obviously an off-season challenge for us moving forward. But I do think that EJ, even though he's a forward, provides some rim protection. And then Kyle's going to have to get better at that. And then our young bigger guys are going to have to help us there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We'll go to Steve Hellwagon with 247.
Yeah, Coach, thanks again for doing this teleconference. The question I have is kind of along the lines of Joe. It seems like you're going to go with you've got veteran guys at the other 4 spots, but looks like this is a by-committee approach if the roster stays the way it is at the 5 position, the center position. Just in your mind, you've got the 2 younger guys and the 2 older, undersized guys, I guess. I don't know. How do you feel going into it that'll break down? And I assume you'll wait and hope for somebody to kind of grab the brass ring there and maybe make that position their own.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the one thing you got to keep in mind is that Kyle, his last 2 years here, has played the power forward spot, but he's guarded the biggest guy. He's went through that the last 2 years. He's played that backup role to Caleb. He started some and then obviously played the backup role to Caleb. So I think with he and EJ, kind of EJ as your power forward and Kyle as your power forward / that I think that's, and then those other guys will fill in a lot of ways. And I think that the young guys are young guys. Ibrahima, we talked about Zed and his, while he's undersized, he has good length. And then there's obviously times where you won't play I don't know that we'll play necessarily a traditional 5. We will some with Ibrahima, but the other times it's going to be playing what a lot of college basketball plays now. I mean, if you were to look, say, at Michigan State this year, what did they play? Who was one of the best defenders in college basketball. That's where a lot of the game has gone. No one would look at him and say he's your 5. So we've got to get those guys better in some certain areas. We've got to keep him healthy because he's yet in his career been able to play above, I believe, 23 minutes a game in league play. And a lot of it has been a byproduct of just having some injuries. So the biggest thing for him is we've got to keep him healthy and able to go through the grind of a season.
Yep. Other question I have is, it looked like you guys had Tony Dungy on your Zoom call, yesterday with your team, and it would just seem that without me being on the call, my guess is the message was you guys need to invest in one another and become a true team. Then I'm sure some of that already existed with the guys who are still back, but just was that perhaps a message that you were hoping that he would resonate? What were some of the things that he maybe talked about in terms of team building and caring for one another, I suppose?
Here's what it was, because I think when and who knows what the reality is our group last year did really have a special bond. You don't finish 9-3 and respond to losing 6 out of 7 without having a connectedness and a closeness. We really did. Now I think moving forward, the biggest thing for me bringing him, Steve, was just he's got so much wisdom, and I just wanted to take an opportunity when we are meeting as a team once a week or once every 2 weeks to just bring guys that can share wisdom. And he talked as much as anything about a couple of their strike years and lockouts when he was in the NFL, and I believe the Redskins might have won both of those Super Bowls. And he just talked about how they were able to utilize their time apart, and that when they returned, they had a real closeness and a real bond. And then he just talked about some things that have made, he shared some Peyton Manning, some Marvin Harrison stories that I think were really interesting for our guys, even though, unfortunately our guys don't remember Marvin Harrison. They do Peyton Manning, but not as much Marvin Harrison. But I remember the kind of worker that Marvin Harrison was. So we shared some great stories about his work ethic, and then we just asked him, hey, obviously all of our guys aspire to play at the next level. What are some things when you were head coach that you were looking for in next level guys? So that was really what it was about. It wasn't geared towards. I didn't channel him in any specific direction. I just said, take it and run with it.
Good.
And he was outstanding.
Yep. Thanks, Coach.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We'll go to Patrick Murphy with Bud Nuts.
Thanks, Chris. I'm curious, given the number of new guys we've touched on, the transfers and the freshmen, plus Justice, I know was hurt for a lot of last year. Moose was hurt for a lot of last year. Yeah. What's your concern level with building the chemistry on the court, especially given this circumstance, not knowing when you'll be able to be back there?
It's a concern. Yeah, it is a concern. I'm sure it's a concern for every coach. But we do have a number of new faces, and given the uncertainty about when we're all going to be able to gather together, I think it's something that I think we're going to have to get a group that we're going to have to hit the ground running as soon as we can get back together. And that doesn't mean we're going to overwork our guys, but it does mean I think we're going to have to hit the ground running in terms of our ability to connect as a group and to figure out each other's strengths. And, I think that even affected us a little bit last year. We talked about, learning how we were going to close games, and, blame it on me. We didn't fully learn that. We didn't have many close games early, but we didn't fully learn that until I think we were able to put guys in better positions there in February and March. And sometimes that happens with new pieces. We'll have to get to that obviously early, and it's a concern for us, like I'm sure it is with every coach.
And even with Justice being hurt last year, just having him around, and I know he was able to do some stuff earlier in the year, how big is that for what he'll be able to do when he's on the court?
Well, he's a smart kid, terrific kid. I think he'll have to transition to a Big Ten basketball. It's different than the league he came from, but he's motivated and obviously has to get healthy, but he will. But it was great having him around, and it was really great when he was in practice, because we began to see some of the things that we were gonna see next year. He's hard to keep in front. He's terrific at getting to the paint. One of the things we lose with Caleb is that guy that could draw fouls and get to the paint. Justice does that at a high level, and so unfortunately we weren't able to do great skill work with him this season. But it was great having him, and really excited about him moving forward.
Thanks.
Okay, next we'll go up with Colin Haas-Hill with Lettermen Warriors.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Colin.
You mentioned the roster movement getting normalized to a point in college basketball, but when you're a program like you are, where you're sort of trying to go from being a good team in the Big Ten to winning a conference title, how do you make sure that progress doesn't get derailed when you have transfers, especially when it's two guys who were contributors last year?
Yeah, I think it's again, I think you're always mindful of that. I think we also understand. Part of this is you do understand that in all likelihood, right? DJ he wasn't necessarily going to be a 4-year player. So you always have some contingency plans, and I think that's the reality. But I think you're trying to, as you go through it here, Colin, you're trying to see what pieces fit and how do they fit with each other. And that's a pretty much an ever evolving process, whether it's a young man that isn't playing as much and maybe you saw him as an important rotation piece, but he wants more, or a guy that decides to professionalize early. I just think it's where we're at, and as much as you can, you try to stabilize. You mentioned it. I think we've had, we've certainly had 3 good years, and I think we could have taken the next step in terms of the postseason this year. But I think that we also anticipated that there was going to be some movement here in these first 2 to 3, 4 years. So you kind of, in your mind, are preparing and planning for that, and preparing and planning for that as much as you can in recruiting. So I think there'll be, more consistency, but I also think, listen, the reality is that none of us know what's going to happen when the new transfer rules take effect, whenever that is. So I think what we're going through now could only be increased significantly. Not specific to our program, but I just think in general in college basketball.
In terms of the health of some of your guys, you got quite a few guys who you think are going to be rotation pieces who are rehabbing from stuff. Are you able to give any sort of an update on sort of Justice, Kyle, Musa, and Seth, and maybe where they are in their rehabs, and when you expect that they'll be able to go full go? I'm not sure if what they've been doing in the rehab has been affected by the pandemic.
It has. Yeah, it has. It has affected them, just because you're right. They're only doing essential things right now. So we've been able to try to keep tabs on it, but honestly, what we're going through, everything has taken a back seat, and that even includes, to some degree, our players' ability to do certain things. But they have been able to rehab through some things with Brad, our trainer, whether it's in all cases, it's actually been virtually done. But there's some limitations on that. It's just part of where we're at right now. And you're right, we do have some guys recovering. I think they'll all recover and be healthy, but that's a question mark as well.
Okay, up next, Dan Hope, Lettermen Warriors.
Hey, Chris, when you're going through a situation like this, do you get in touch much with Ryan Day or Kevin McGuff or some of the other coaches at Ohio State to kind of come up with strategies for how to deal with a situation like this?
The pandemic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. Ryan and I have talked a little bit, and just kind of bounced a few ideas off of. I've tried to ask him kind of, what are you doing? What are you doing with your guys right now? What is, what are you doing with your time? What are your guys doing? What's your staff doing? So yeah, I have had those conversations. 2 weeks into this, I had a conversation as well with Urban. Urban called me, gave me some good thoughts on things that if he were in this position, he'd be doing. I know he shared that with Ryan too, that he'd be doing with his players. And then you talk to a lot of coaches around the country, and some coaches are a little bit like, hey, this is what it is. I'm not going to fight it. There's not a whole lot we can do. I'm going to obviously do my recruiting, but I've got 4 little kids, so that's occupying a lot of my time. And then I think other guys are trying to do different things with their staff. There's a number of different ideas around, but yeah, I have tried to pick the brain of some other guys.
How often have you been holding meetings with your team, and what are kind of some of the things that you've been trying to communicate with them in those meetings?
Once a week, we have a Zoom meeting, and it's just our way of touching base. with our guys collectively. And I think they enjoy that too, is, hop on there. They were in great spirits yesterday. I tweeted out a picture of them all. They were just, I think they enjoy kind of at least getting reconnected for a minute. I try not to keep them too long. But it's right now, to be honest with you, it's a lot of academic stuff, finishing the semester. And then I do remind them about the importance of taking this seriously for their sake, for their health, for their family's health. And then if we have time, like we did yesterday, we'll have thoughts from maybe a speaker or myself. But yeah, once a week for sure. And then we touch base with our guys on other, individually every other, usually every couple days.
Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
All right, thanks, Dan. Next up, Austin Ward with Lettermen Row.
Hey, Chris, thanks for your time.
Sure.
When you, as a coach, with what you missed out on with the postseason, and you've talked a couple of times about what you thought could have happened for you all in March, how often are you thinking about that, your mind drifting to going through a tournament and what could have happened? How often have you thought about that over the last 4 weeks?
Honestly, I've thought about it more in the last couple of weeks than I did in the first few weeks afterwards. And I think, I don't know, maybe I'm not exactly sure why. I think I just missed it. I think some of it is I think some of it came about from watching some of our games in the last month and a half. But I have thought about it more in the last couple of weeks, and just, I just was really excited and in some cases curious about what we could be. And I'm not, we had our flaws. I'm not delusional, but I do think we had a very good way about us. So I've thought about it a lot more in the last couple of weeks. I really have, than even the first couple of weeks, which was, I think, more about trying to assess where we were at and where we were moving forward. Now that I've had a chance to take a step back, I've thought a lot about, what it could have been.
Is it better for you that they didn't put out a bracket?
I would have loved to have seen a bracket, loved to have seen it. I think more just for the conversation and more for, in my mind, kind of you're thinking. We all know, right? In all likelihood, I think we all know we would have been a 4, 5, or 6, right? That's where we would have been, a 4, 5, or 6. So when you're in those games, your first round game is really hard. It just really is. So there's no guarantees in any of that. But I think it would have been fun to kind of take a look at that and know kind of what we could have, who we would have played in that first game and potentially in that second game and moving forward. I would have liked to have seen that. I'm sure it would have made it harder, but I would have loved to have seen it. Having said that, I get why they didn't do it.
Fair enough. Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Good, thanks, Austin. Up next, Spencer Olbrook, Lettermen Row.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for doing this.
Sure, Spencer.
I was just wondering, when you have a guy like Kyle who you rely on for leadership now that the Wessons are gone, how much do you kind of rely on him to keep your guys working and just keeping them accountable during this time when all you can do is really Zoom meeting with them? How much do you rely on a guy like Kyle to keep your guys in check and to keep them focused?
Kyle and CJ play a major role in that. Those two play a major role in that. So I put it on both of those guys to stay in touch with our guys, to monitor how they're doing. And I think that'll be a next step for Kyle too. I think he's anxious for that. But that's the next step for him to kind of accept that ownership moving forward. He's more than capable of doing it. He has the respect of everybody in the team. So does certainly CJ does as well. I think both those guys are going to play a major role when it comes to that. CJ kind of is naturally more inclined to do that. Probably part of it's the position he plays, but we're going to need Kyle to do that as well.
When you have a group of guys like Seth now and Justice finally being able to, get into some action, and then you also have CJ and Kyle who have played extensive minutes for you, is it kind of weird to think that this team is going to be a veteran team, but also a couple of these guys haven't even played for Ohio State yet?
Yeah, I think the idea of getting, in a perfect world, you get older, you get experienced together, doing that together. But the blend will be important. There is a transition phase that happens when you're a transfer. That just is typically, sometimes it's quicker for some guys than other. What you usually see is those guys play their best in January, February, March, and I would assume that would be the case. Whether it's a guy who's just joined us or when you sit out like Justice did, you have a chance to transition a little bit quicker. But stepping into a new role is always at a new place. There's always a transition period.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. That turn will go up to Bruce Hooley with SI Maven.
Hey, Coach.
Hey, Bruce.
Wanted to ask you about your evolving recruiting strategy. I mean, you've got a lot of transfers. That may be the wave of the future with immediate eligibility one time in a career, with name and likeness, which might turn it into somewhat of a bidding war or a missing piece, and a kid gets wondering eyes, is like, hey, I can go there and fill a role and whatever. Traditionally, it's always been, if you want to win the national championship, you've got to have a pro or two on your team. But now you're in an era where you might be evaluating that it might be better to have older guys, and you can get a 5-star committed, as has been happening here lately, and they can decide to go play professionally in Europe. Then your recruiting class falls apart at the last minute. I just wonder how much time you and your staff start thinking about or spend thinking about how to craft a recruiting strategy so you can build a team that can win a championship, which I'm sure is your goal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fluid. For one, I think it's because times are changing and continue to change and have changed in our game, in college basketball specifically. So I think there is some fluidity to that. Bruce, having said that, I think the bulk of our roster will always be with high school players that grow and develop and are a part of our program. I think that will remain to be the case. That will be the case. It will remain to be the case. I just think that's naturally my preference. But I think you also have to be willing to respond to the fact that all the things you mentioned, kids are professionalizing earlier than they ever have. There will be, even though there's obviously a great number of transfers now, there's more transfers out of your program. There's more transfers available. So that'll always, I think you have to be mindful of all of those trends in our games. But the bulk will always be, for us, will always be those high school players that develop, high school prep school kids that develop in our program. But we'll certainly be a blend as well. And I think more than anything, we're looking for the right fit. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I've covered various coaches at Ohio State who had different philosophies on recruiting guys that they knew were going to be one and dones back when LeBron was coming out and he could go straight to the NBA. Obi didn't even spend any time recruiting him. Thad always wanted the one and dones if he could get them. You're in an era where the NBA could be changing its rule. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that kid who, you might only have him for 1 year, Do you look at it as a got to get him? Do you look at it as depending on where he's from? If he's an Ohio kid, you got to have him.
Yeah.
Or how do you
Certainly.
view one and dones?
I think it's it just, as I've said since I got, it has to be the right fit. It has to be the right. I think for us, it has to be the right fit for our program and the right fit for our how we do things. So I certainly wouldn't say no to a situation, but I want to make sure that it's the right fit. And I think knowing that, I'm sure all of the one and dones or the guys that you mentioned earlier that have made decisions to not play at all, my guess is there was some type of contingency plans in place. Coaches know these things typically way before the public does. So way before. So, and you know that, Bruce. So there's usually some type of contingency plan in place.
What makes it the right fit? Like, is it family and what kind of kid he is, or
well,
what
I think,
you get?
I think I think he'd have to want to play at Ohio State and play for a championship and be a part of that experience. Like that, I think he'd have to really, he'd have to value that. And he'd have to value what this place can do a tremendous amount for young men like that. But he'd have to value that experience, and wanting to be a part of a team that's trying to compete for championships in the best league in the country. I think that's the biggest thing, as much as anything, is we'd have to kind of get that sense. And there are plenty of guys that are in that boat too, that know that they need a year of college and a year or two, whatever the case may be, and genuinely want to play in an opportunity where they can compete for there's plenty of guys out there.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Next we'll go to Doug Lee-Maurice with Cleveland.com.
Hey, Chris. When
hey,
you sort of talk about, but when you look at the 3 years here, you had a tournament team every year, 10 games over 500 in the Big Ten. Just what you guys have done on the court, and then where the program sits right now. Just how would you evaluate how your tenure has gone so far to this point?
Doug, I will really leave that up to other people to make their evaluation. If you were to sit back and evaluate our 3 years relative to other situations in the last 3 or 4 years where guys were hired, listen, I certainly feel good about that in the start we've had here. There's no question I feel good about the start we've had here in our 3 years. And I think, as I've spoken a number of times, we were buoyed by, in a lot of ways, by tremendous leadership from Jay Tate and Kada, and that helped us. We also recognized that there was the middle of our roster was there were some significant issues that we had to address, which is why we brought in 8 players. So we anticipated that there was going to be some ups and downs, both in our performance and probably some degree of fluidity with the roster. But to have the best year in terms of Ken Palm numbers that we've had, to be one of 6 teams in the country to have a top 20 offense and defensive efficiency, to finish 8th in the country in Ken Palm, and to generally feel good about some of the young guys we've added and the transfers. I feel very good about it. But in terms of the whole perspective of comparing our tenure, last 3 or 4, I guess 3 years, to other people's, other people can do that and judge that. I feel very good about it, feel very good about where we're heading. That doesn't mean that you don't take a step back, Doug, and really evaluate what can we and what can I do better, and what do we need to do better, both in terms of every area, coaching, recruiting, because there's no one that I think is more motivated to compete at the kind of level that we all want to compete at here. And I think we all recognize, before Thad got here, I said this, we hadn't seen great, consistency. I don't think there was a situation outside of the 60s where we had went to 3 straight NCAA tournaments. So we've had some consistency here in our first start here. And now how do we continue to grow it in a way where it can sustain itself and then hopefully get to the next level? That's all we're consumed with right now. And we're evaluating everything we can do and do better in that regard.
And when you talk about, like, no one knows what would have happened in the tournament, but you seem to feel good about it. Like, what do you think? Like, Sweet 16 team, and let's take our shot against the 1 seed in that round? Or, like, what could you guys have really done?
Yeah, I certainly feel like, a couple years ago when we were at Butler, we were a 4 seed. I felt really good about where we were playing there. I thought we had great versatility. We were kind of just good enough defensively. And I thought offensively, we could score the ball. And I did feel like that this group could this group. Now we get that team got beat by North Carolina, who went on to win the national championship. But I did feel like we had the potential. We certainly had that kind of potential. And then, I think probably what gets me a little bit even sour reflecting back is now you go look at this is the first team that we've had that finished top 10 in KenPom. That's a really high number, and I keep referring to that because there is some predictive measures to that, as much as you can be in the NCAA tournament. So I did feel like we had our defense was just good enough, but our offense was really efficient. And when you have a very difficult matchup like Caleb Wesson with his ability inside and outside, I think that did give us a chance to really get to the second weekend. And I know that was a thing our guys had talked about after winning a couple games in our first 2 years. They had really talked about that. And who knows what could have happened after that. But I did feel good about it, yeah.
All right, I'm not going to count that as an actual question, so let me dive in on one last one. Just can you explain the process of when you come from a successful program like Butler and you're coming to a place like Ohio State? We've been talking a lot about roster building. Just as you think about what have you learned, what have you had to do that's a little bit different from the way you recruited at Butler, what has been the same? Just now that you've been through it with a couple classes, do you feel like how much of an adjustment has it been, and how good of a handle do you think you have at this point on sort of exactly the kind of guys you want to go after in recruiting at Ohio State?
Better than I did 3 years ago, for sure. I think better than I did three years ago, and probably more committed now than I've ever been to really being specific about kind of what we're looking for. And again, that's not to say that I don't want that to be a reflection on anything. It's just I think I certainly do have a better feel now for than what I did 3 years ago, and probably even a greater commitment. So I think I have learned, and I think the best thing about it is we've been able to win in the midst of probably me learning some things when it comes to all that. And that's a good thing, to be able to obviously still winning, and going through some things where I could maybe reflect back and say, it's probably something I could, that's an area I can do better. It's an area we as a staff can do better. So, and talking comprehensively in our program, recruiting and all of it. So, I think that I certainly feel like I have a better feel now than 3 years ago. And I feel very good about the young guys that we've, E.J. Liddell is going to be a very good player. We've got some young guys that have really developed and transfers that have really grown. So I am really genuinely excited about that. But I think I'm glad that we've been able to probably take this time to sit back and take stock of things we can continue to improve on.
Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Okay, finally, we'll wrap up with Tanya Kelly on the move. Tanya, you still with us?
Hello, Coach Holtmann. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Just trying to stay safe. My
well,
question
good for you
to
for
you
staying on here.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity to kind of talk to you because I know with the season cut short, I just kind of wanted to say with the COVID-19, how has been recruiting? You know, what strategies have you been using to continue the recruiting process and get new players on the team?
It's been a lot of FaceTime, Zoom calls, conference calls with our recruiting assistants and myself. So some of these collective, calls that have been made. We've been able to do some within NCAA rules, some video stuff with recruits. You're trying to build relationships as much as you can face to face, because normally that's what we would be doing right now in the spring is having people to campus. So that's really occupied a lot of our times. We've been doing our normal mail outs and text kind of mail outs, but that's in large part what we're doing is a lot of conference calls, video conference calls.
And my follow-up question is, how have the athletes, have they been receptive to the FaceTime? Because, you know, they're in a technology world. So how has it been for you getting used to the technology versus, you know, the athletes? This is what their livelihood is, what they use.
It's the world. It is their world. So we've started to FaceTime recruits really for probably the last year and a half, 2 years. And I'm sure my assistants, and particularly my younger assistants, it's the only way they communicate with recruits. Both Eugene and Zed a lot of our calls were FaceTime calls. EJ Liddell, a lot of his recruitment was FaceTime recruitment. So I think it's just become a norm, and now we're doing more kind of presentations through a Zoom or a FaceTime.
Well, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, Coach. I think that's about it. Anything else you want to add?
No, just stay well. Hope everybody stays well and their families stay well, and hope everybody stays well, stays employed, and we can get through this together here. So all the best to you guys.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and you know we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.